Within, why is a test drive more than just a quick loop around the block?
Well, for the same reason that a benefit is more important than an alphabet. And you have to engage, connect, and help them take mental ownership of the vehicle. Uh, if they just ride in the passenger seat for 2 minutes, that's no kind of ownership. They don't feel a connection. And of course, the other big side of it is if you just drive them around the block and there's issues with the vehicle, that can turn into a heat customer after delivery. But if you take them on a long, carefully mapped out test drive that goes over multiple areas that are applicable to their life and how they're going to be using that automobile, then if there are any issues, they come up before anything moves along too far, and you can address them and take care of them. It might be something as simple as helping to adjust the mirrors ahead of time, or change the way that the radio responds, or to show them where the controls are for the cruise control on the steering wheel, or whatever it might happen to be. But a real quick blast in the car around the block is not going to help them take mental ownership, but it's also not going to make sure that the vehicle is correct for them under the conditions that they're going to be driving it. And it's where the sale becomes real.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with, and the route definitely matters. We always had a set route, for a couple of reasons. One, safety. Something were to happen, while you're out on that route. But it was a combination of, driving in, basic routes, a little bit of highway, so they could get it up to, ramp up speeds, and then merging into traffic just to see how the fit and the feel of it would be. We had one guy that worked with us, and he used to love to show how the anti-lock braking systems used to work. And he'd get the car up to about 50 miles an hour, and he'd slam on the brakes and scare the wits out of the passengers. But he was demonstrating the functionality of, like you're talking about, that StabiliTrak. Not recommended today, but the idea was to show the features and a benefit of that particular system. But to the point is, you want to make sure you're taking them away from the dealership environment too. I used to go, there was a park near us, and you could stop and get out and kind of look at it in a just a different environment. It was neutral, and they could just take a look at it, and you know it's just all about. That's where the salesperson always drove off the lot. Okay, that's the first thing.
Yep, it
When you
was a
went to
safety
that,
fact. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and
that's a
so
primary safety issue, but it's also an issue of having control, making the customer feel comfortable at first.
yeah,
Uh, and I can give a quick anecdote of why the salesperson driving off the lot is so important. There was a salesperson that we trained and we came back to later on, and yeah, he took some shortcuts here and there. And one time, he just jumped in, and the customer kind of assumed, and he let the customer go in the driver's seat, and they took off for the thing, and the customer's just going, well, this thing's sluggish. I don't know. And what's that horrible smell? The customer, not being familiar with the car, didn't see the little brake light and didn't realize that, well, he didn't put, the emergency brake on when he parked the car, but at the dealership they did. So he drove about 3 blocks with the emergency brake on in this brand new car, ruined the rear brake pads, of course. And, obviously, either between his dissatisfaction with the car, or, the smell, or just being embarrassed, that sale was blown.
yeah, and that's a great point. You get in that vehicle, and here again, we're assuming a lot when we brought that vehicle up to that customer. If it's ahead of time, first thing, make sure it's got fuel. The last thing you want to do is run out of gas on a test drive. I mean, that you talk about embarrassing and cost you a sale. But make sure everything's operational. And that's even more important if it's a used vehicle that you're demonstrating with the customer. Okay, but the idea of you take it off the lot, you go into a neutral site, as I said, that's why you do the switch over. And as I was talking about earlier, that neutral site, you walk around the vehicle, you're doing a quick walk around, let's say, about some of the things you talked about when you were still on the lot. But
Yeah,
that's where you get 'em.
continuation, right?
Yeah, and that's where you sit them in a car, get everything adjusted for them to their liking so that they're comfortable and get them to ease into it. So if it's in a neutral place, they can, check the throttle, check the brakes, make sure your mirrors are correct, and then just ease into the drive. And the thing about it is when you start asking questions about the car, or the truck or SUV, whatever. How does that feel? You're looking for positive answers here, right? Does it have a good feel to you? How is that, the acceleration? Is it what you expected? Yes. Is it a comfortable ride? You're not feeling a whole lot of these potholes, like we got here in New Orleans. And, it's a comfortable ride. Yeah. Okay. So you want to get all as many positive questions because they're concentrating on driving a car. They're not thinking about how they're going to respond. You want them to do this, okay? Shake their head and give them positive yeses. And the more yeses you get, the easier it's going to be when you pull up into the driveway at the dealership again. And you start
Yep.
asking some closing questions, which is what we're going to get into in our next episode.
Yeah. Yeah. Starting out with the salesperson driving, the other thing that they can do is they can turn on certain features that the customer would have a hard time finding in a brand new unfamiliar car where they might not have even had these features before. And of course, we're talking about running the air conditioning for 20 minutes before they get near the car down in New Orleans. But I mean, in other climates, you want to turn on the heated seats and the heated steering wheel and that sort of thing well before they get in the car. So their first impression getting in the passenger seat is, oh, this thing is toasty. And then their first impression when you've driven a while, taken them, through a little bit of a route and then found that good turnover spot is, oh, the steering wheel's nice and comfortable and toasty too. It becomes important for multiple reasons that the salesperson drive first, safety, taking control, connection, but also, better being able to show the benefits of direct features because they can control them and show them to the customer while they're in the driver's seat. And then the customer can use those features when they've switched places and they're driving back with the vehicle.
Yeah, the worst thing that can happen is, you actually make the sale on a vehicle, and then a week or two later they come back and they ask a question about a feature that you didn't get a chance to go over, and you're embarrassed because you know it's a feature that really and truly they may have paid more for the vehicle if they knew it was on there. I mean, I had a lady that I ran into. I didn't sell her the vehicle, but she had a Highline Infinity vehicle, and she was talking about well, what it was is my Buick. I have the remote pre-start, and so I did that while I was sitting there conversing with her. And she says, "Boy, I wish my car had that." And I said, "It does." And she goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "You got your keys on you?" She says, "Yeah." I said, "Give me your keys." So I walked up over. I said, "Here, let me show you." And I pressed two buttons on her Infinity, and it started right up. She says, "I've been driving this thing a year and a half, and I didn't know I had that feature." Okay. I mean, so imagine the Infinity salesperson who actually sold that vehicle to this lady. I mean, he left money on the table because there was a feature she
Yeah,
probably would have paid more for, knowing that it was there. And you
no
see,
excuse at all unless
none,
it,
none,
maybe it's LA or something where
no,
where you don't have to
no.
warm up or cool off a vehicle.
But that's where the salesperson has to know the vehicle that they're presenting. Okay. Base model car may not have had that feature. Okay. If it was the Nissan Pathfinder base model, okay, maybe it didn't have it. But an Infinity, the Infinity SUV, yeah, absolutely it's going to have it. Okay. And
But you do
so
have to know your vehicles and not make any
that's
assumptions
exactly right. That's
because
exactly
remote
right.
start is an optional feature on most BMWs, or at least many BMWs.
Right. But the key here is, here's a lady who had a car, paid good money for it, and had no idea that this feature was even optional or available or included in the car she purchased. I'll go one step further. We had a deal we were doing years ago. We were selling Mazdas, and a lady came in about 2 weeks after the sale, and she was complaining. She said, every time I put a CD in, it eats it. I said, what do you mean it eats it? She said, I put it in. and nothing happens. Well, what
Hmm.
happened is she had a 6 disc in-dash loader for her
Oh,
disc player, and the salesperson didn't inform her that it wasn't just a single load.
I remember
She couldn't
those.
figure out how it worked. And I'm thinking, I remember the deal. We were $500 away from making a deal, and we had to cut it to get her over the curb. Now imagine if the salesperson had done his job and said, it's got a 6 disc in-dash CD player. I mean, at the time it was, probably worth, $400 or $500 as an add-on. Maybe we
Yep.
wouldn't have had to cut to gross.
Oh,
And that's what I'm saying, you got to know
I
your
actually
and
saw
your
an even
features.
worse version of that. We once took a trade-in. I think it might have been a BMW. No, it was a Porsche. That's right. And in the trunk, they had the CD changer, and it still had the factory strip over it. So the CD changer in the trunk, I think it might have been a 6 or a 10, had never been used by this guy in 2.5 years. And I
Hmm.
guarantee you it's because no one told him about it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you probably think it's, an amp, or some other computer system, for the car, just not recognized. And of course, back then you had the big carriages, where you could load, uh, into it on a 10 disc, just load them up and put the cartridge in rather than not a carriage. But yeah, but it goes to saying, again, I'll go back to my days selling vans. I could sit there and talk 2 hours on a conversion van, because they had so many different features and benefits and things for the consumer. In the early 90s, selling a Chevy Cavalier, it didn't take long to do a walk around, okay? But you still had to build value, even though it was an entry-level car, because it had a lot of safety features that a lot of its contemporaries didn't. And that's how you distinguish your product from somebody else that they may be competing against.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe for more, and drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you and it really helps out.